Silence costs money in New York City. Absolute silence? That costs a fortune. Amy Fletcher stood in her private elevator as it ascended smoothly to the 54th floor, the numbers blinking upward in a soft, rhythmic cadence. At 2:04 a.m., the city below was a sprawling grid of neon and noise, a beast that never truly slept. But inside the glass and steel sanctuary of the Fletcher building, the world was hermetically sealed. Amy closed her eyes, leaning her head against the cool mirrored wall of the elevator. She was 34 years old, the CEO of Fletcher Industries, and she had just spent the last 48 hours in a brutal negotiation room in Chicago, dismantling a competitor's acquisition bid. She had won. She always won. That was what the cover of Forbes said, wasn't it? The Ice Queen of Wall Street. The elevator chimed, a soft, polite sound that signaled she was home. The door slid open to reveal her penthouse. It was a masterpiece of modern design, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, Italian marble floors that clicked sharply under her Louboutin heels, and abstract art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. It was perfect, it was pristine, and it was suffocatingly empty. Amy stepped out, dropping her leather briefcase onto a console table. Her shoulders, usually squared in a power suit, slumped. The adrenaline of the deal was fading, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion that seeped into her bones. All she wanted was a glass of scotch and 12 hours of dreamless sleep. She kicked off her heels, wincing as the blood rushed back into her feet, and padded silently in her stockings across the expansive living room. She headed toward the master suite, passing the hallway that led to her home office, a room she strictly forbade the cleaning staff from entering without supervision. She stopped. A sliver of light was bleeding out from under the mahogany door of her office. Amy froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a sudden, violent drum in the silence. She lived alone. The housekeeping staff left at 5 p.m. The security system hadn't triggered. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Corporate espionage? A break-in? A glitch? She didn't call 911, not yet. Amy Fletcher didn't panic. She assessed. She took a breath, steeling herself, and moved toward the door. She didn't have a weapon, but she had the element of surprise. She reached for the brass handle, the metal cold against her palm, and twisted it. The door swung open. What? What the hell do you think you're? The shout died in her throat. The scene before her was so surreal, so utterly disconnected from the narrative of a robbery, that her brain struggled to process it. Sitting at her desk, her custom-made $10,000 antique desk, was Marcus Donovan. She knew him vaguely. He was one of the building's maintenance guys. A big man, maybe 6'3", with broad shoulders that usually strained the fabric of his gray work uniform. He was the guy who fixed the AC when it rattled, the guy who changed the light bulbs in the high ceilings. He was a background character in her life, someone she offered a curt nod to in the lobby, but never truly saw. But tonight, the background character had taken center stage. Marcus wasn't ransacking the room. He wasn't hacking into her computer. He wasn't stealing the Patek Philippe watch she'd left on the bookshelf. He was counting money. But it wasn't her money. It wasn't stacks of crisp $100 bills or bearer bonds. It was a sea of crumpled, pathetic paper. Hundreds, maybe thousands of single-dollar bills, fives, tens, and quarters covered the pristine surface of her desk like a chaotic mosaic of poverty. There were rolls of pennies, crinkled checks, and wads of cash held together by rubber bands that looked like they were about to snap. Marcus didn't even look up when the door opened. He was hunched over, his massive frame shaking. His rough, calloused hands that fixed pipes and hauled trash, were moving with a frantic, trembling precision. 22, 23, 24, he whispered, his voice cracking. He picked up a crumpled $5 bill, smoothed it out against the polished wood of the desk with a tenderness that made Amy's stomach turn, and placed it on a small stack. Then he wrote a number in a small, beat-up spiral notebook lying next to the pile. Amy took a step forward, her anger momentarily suspended by confusion. Marcus? He jumped. The movement was so violent that his knee hit the desk, sending a tower of quarters crashing to the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room, metal clattering against hardwood, spinning and rolling into the shadows. Marcus scrambled up, his chair tipping over backward. He looked at her, and Amy felt the air leave the room. She expected to see guilt. She expected the shifty eyes of a thief caught in the act. Instead, she saw terror, pure, unadulterated terror. His face was wet. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. This giant of a man who looked like he could punch through a drywall was crying. Not a silent, stoic cry, but a messy, desperate weeping that he was trying and failing to suppress. "Ms. Fletcher," he choked out, his voice thick. He held his hands up, not in surrender, but as if trying to shield the pile of cash. I can explain. Please, don't call the police. Please." Amy stood in the doorway, her hand still gripping the knob. She was wearing a tailored Versace suit. He was wearing a stained gray jumpsuit with the name Marcus, stitched in fading red thread over the pocket. The distance between them was less than 10 feet, but in that moment, it felt like an ocean. "You're in my private office, Marcus," Amy said, her voice trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the sheer bizarre nature of the situation. "It's 2 a.m. You're surrounded by—" She gestured vaguely at the mess on her desk. "Cash. It's mine," Marcus blurted out. "I swear to God, Miss Fletcher, it's mine. I didn't take a dime from you. The table. I needed a big table. The light is good here. I didn't think you'd be back until Thursday." He dropped to his knees, not to beg, but to frantically scoop up the quarters that had fallen. His large fingers fumbled with the coins, his desperation palpable. "I'll clean it up. I'll leave. Just please. I can't lose this job. I really can't lose this job." Amy watched him. Her corporate instincts, the ones that told her to eliminate liabilities and secure assets, were screaming at her to call security. This was a breach. He had keys he shouldn't use. He was unstable. But then her eyes drifted back to the desk, to the notebook. It was a cheap drugstore notebook, the cover peeling at the corners. Beside the money there was something else, a photograph. It was small, worn at the edges as if it had been held and stared at 1,000 times. It was a picture of a little girl. Amy felt a strange prickle at the back of her neck. She looked at Marcus, who was now shoving handfuls of crumpled bills into a canvas duffel bag, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Stop," Amy said. Marcus froze, a fistful of $1 bills clutched in his hand. "Stand up," she commanded. Her voice was quieter now, stripped of the CEO edge. Marcus slowly rose. He looked like a man facing a firing squad. "You're not stealing from me," Amy stated, more to herself than to him. She walked further into the room, ignoring the instinct to keep her distance. She looked at the pathetic piles of money. "Thieves don't break into a penthouse to count singles and quarters." She looked up at him, meeting his bloodshot eyes. "So tell me, Marcus, why are you counting pocket change in the middle of the night in the most expensive apartment in Manhattan?" Marcus looked down at the photo on the desk. His shoulders heaved, a sob escaping his chest before he could clamp a hand over his mouth. "I'm counting," he whispered, his voice breaking into a million pieces, "to see if I have enough to buy a life." The phrase hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like humidity before a summer storm. To buy a life. Amy Fletcher stared at the man kneeling on her Persian rug. Her mind, trained to dissect balance sheets and legal contracts, tried to categorize his statement. Was it a metaphor? A plea? But looking at Marcus Donovan, at the raw, jagged desperation etched into the lines of his face, she knew it was neither. It was a literal transaction. She stepped fully into the room, her heels sinking silently into the plush carpet. The adrenaline that had surged when she first opened the door was now replaced by a cold, forensic curiosity. "Get up, Marcus," Amy said again, her voice softer this time, though still commanding. She walked over to the desk and pulled the leather guest chair out. "Sit." Marcus hesitated. He looked at the chair. Italian leather, worth more than his car, and then down at his grease-stained work pants. "Sit," she repeated sharper. He obeyed, sinking onto the edge of the seat as if ready to bolt. He kept his hands clutched around the canvas bag on his lap, his knuckles white. Amy leaned against the edge of her desk, crossing her arms. She didn't look at him. She looked at the chaotic spread of currency he hadn't managed to sweep up yet. A few crumpled fives, a roll of pennies, and that notebook. She reached out and picked it up. "Miss Fletcher, please," Marcus started, his voice a low rumble of panic. "That's private. It's just numbers." "You said you were buying a life," Amy said, flipping the cover open. The cardboard was soft from wear, the metal spiral binding bent. "Whose life, Marcus?" Marcus took a shuddering breath. He reached out and turned the small, dog-eared photograph on the desk so it faced her. Lily, he said. The name came out like a prayer. My daughter, she turns 7 next month. Amy looked at the photo. The girl had Marcus's dark eyes and a smile that seemed too big for her face. She was sitting in a hospital bed, surrounded by tubes, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together. She was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, Marcus said, the medical terminology sounding jarring coming from a man in a maintenance uniform. He spoke with the weary expertise of a parent who had spent too many nights listening to doctors explain why their child might die. Half a heart, that's what she has. Just half a heart trying to do the work of a whole one. Amy looked up from the photo. And she's in heart failure, Marcus said bluntly. He wasn't crying anymore. He had entered a state of numb factualism. The palliative surgeries, they stopped working. Her body is tired. She needs a full reconstruction, a new valve, a bypass. It's complicated. Insurance, Amy asked. It was the American reflex. Marcus let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded like dry leaves crunching. Insurance covered the first 2 surgeries. Then they hit the lifetime cap. Then I switched jobs. The new policy calls this experimental because of the specific surgeon we need. Dr. Sterling at Presbyterian. He's the only one who says he can save her. But he's out of network. The hospital requires a deposit up front. A deposit, Amy echoed. Full payment, Marcus corrected, before they even prepped the OR. Amy looked down at the notebook in her hands. She began to read. It wasn't just a list of numbers. It was an autopsy of a man's existence. The pages were dated back 6 years. The handwriting was cramped, meticulous, written in pencil to save ink. March 12th, skipped lunch, saved $8.50. March 14th, walked home from Queens, no subway, saved $2.75. April 2, sold dad's watch, $150. April 20th, Uber shift, 8 p.m., 4 a.m., saved $85. May 10, Lily's birthday, no cake, saved $25. Amy's eyes traced the lines, page after page, year after year. October 4th, sold the Toyota, $4,200. November 1st, moved to studio basement. Rent difference, $400 month. December 24th, extra shift holiday pay, $200. There were no expenses for clothes, no expenses for entertainment, no coffee, no alcohol, just income, however small, funneled into a single relentless column. Amy felt a strange tightness in her chest. She managed billion-dollar portfolios. She understood money as an abstract concept, leverage, liquidity, assets. But this was money as blood. This was a man carving pieces out of his own life, day by day, dollar by dollar, to feed a savings account. 3 jobs, Marcus said, his voice hollow. I work here from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. I do maintenance at a gym in Hell's Kitchen until 9 how. Then I drive for Uber or do odd repairs until midnight. I sleep 4 hours, I eat peanut butter sandwiches. He looked up at her, his eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying pride. I haven't bought a new pair of shoes in 5 years, Miss Fletcher. I haven't seen a movie. I haven't taken a day off. Every single cent goes to that pile. Amy looked at the totals circled at the bottom of the last page, written in bold, angry ink. $300,000. $300,000. A janitor had saved $300,000 in 6 years. It was impossible. It was miraculous. The surgery is tomorrow morning, Marcus whispered. Dr. Sterling had a cancellation. A spot opened up. If we don't take it, we go back to the bottom of the list. And the doctors, they say she doesn't have time for the bottom of the list. Amy looked at the messy pile of cash on her desk. The counting. The desperation. You have $300,000, Amy said, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. Is it enough? Marcus closed his eyes. The silence that followed was louder than the city outside. The estimate, he choked out, is $347,000, plus fees. Amy did the math instantly. It was a reflex. You're short, she stated. $47,000, Marcus said. The number hung between them like a guillotine blade. I came here tonight. I thought maybe I miscounted. I thought maybe, if I laid it all out, if I counted the pennies, the loose change, the emergency cash I hid in the vents, maybe I'd find it. Maybe a miracle would happen. He gestured helplessly to the scattered bills. I counted it 3 times, Miss Fletcher. I'm short. I'm $47,000 short. He looked at his hands, rough, scarred, trembling. 6 years of starving myself. 6 years of working until my back gave out. And I'm going to lose her because I couldn't walk enough miles. Because I couldn't skip enough meals. He looked up at Amy, and the look on his face broke something inside her that she hadn't realized was calcified. It wasn't just sadness. It was the absolute crushing weight of failure. She's going to die, Marcus whispered, the reality finally breaking through his denial. My little girl is going to die tomorrow because her father is a failure. Amy looked at the notebook in her hand. Skipped lunch, saved $8.50. She looked at her wrist. Her watch cost $12,000. Her shoes cost $800. The bottle of scotch she had been craving cost more than Marcus's weekly grocery budget. For the first time in a decade, Amy Fletcher didn't feel like a CEO. She felt small. She felt ashamed. And beneath the layers of Armani silk and corporate armor, she felt a ghost of a memory. A hospital room, a beeping monitor, and the cold, hard realization that money was useless if you didn't have it when it mattered. She closed the notebook. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Pack it up, she said. Marcus blinked, confused. What? The money, Amy said, her voice steady, masking the tremor in her hands. Put it back in the bag. Ms. Fletcher, I'm sorry about the mess. I'll clean it. Marcus, she interrupted, looking him dead in the eye. Pack the money. You're going to need it. She walked around the desk, picked up her phone, and dialed a number she knew by heart. It was 2:30 a.m., but she didn't care. Who are you calling? Marcus asked, freezing. The police. Amy ignored him. The line clicked open. Robert, she said into the phone, her voice shifting into the icy command tone that made grown men on Wall Street sweat. Wake up. I need a wire transfer authorized immediately. Yes, personal accounts. No, it cannot wait until morning. She looked at Marcus, who was staring at her as if she had grown wings. Get the routing number for the hospital, she told him, covering the mouthpiece. What? Marcus whispered. The routing number, Marcus. Give it to me. Why? Because, Amy said, and for the first time that night her expression softened. It wasn't a smile, but the ice was gone. Because you didn't fail, Marcus, and Lily isn't going to die tomorrow. Robert, I don't care what time it is in Zurich. I don't care about protocol. I am the majority shareholder. Do it. Amy Fletcher's voice was like cut glass, sharp, precise, and dangerous. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan, the phone pressed to her ear. Behind her, the only sound was the jagged, wet breathing of Marcus Donovan. Routing number, she snapped, turning back to him. Marcus was frozen. His large hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. A printout from the hospital billing department that he had carried around like a death sentence for weeks. Amy snatched it from his trembling fingers. Routing number 021. She rattled off the digits to her CFO with the speed of a ticker tape. Account number 894. Beneficiary, New York Presbyterian Hospital, surgical admissions. Amount? Robert's voice crackled on the other end, sounding weary and confused. Amy, surely the $47,000 can come from the petty cash account in the morning. No, Amy interrupted. She looked at Marcus. He was staring at the floor, looking like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to push him over. She looked at the pathetic pile of single-dollar bills and quarters on her desk, the physical manifestation of a father's starvation. Authorize a wire for $400,000, Amy said. The room went dead silent. Ms. Fletcher, no! Marcus gasped, surging forward as if to grab the phone. No, you! I only need the 47. I have the rest. It's right here. It's in the bag. Amy held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks with a glare that could freeze water. Robert, did you hear me? 400,000, Robert repeated, his professional veneer cracking. Amy, that's a significant personal withdrawal. Are you being coerced? I am making an investment, she said, her eyes locked on Marcus. Mark it as urgent medical facilitation. I want the confirmation number sent to my phone in 5 minutes. If the hospital doesn't have the funds by 6 a.m., you're fired. Good night. She tapped the screen and ended the call. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. Marcus was shaking his head, backing away as if she had just pulled a gun on him. I can't take that. I can't pay that back. I make $22 an hour. It would take me 3 lifetimes. I have the 300,000. I worked so hard for it. Keep it, Amy said. What? Keep your money, Marcus. She walked back to her desk and sat on the edge of it, crossing her legs at the ankles. She felt a strange vibration in her chest, a thawing of something that had been frozen for years. You saved that money by starving yourself. You sold your car. You sold your watch. You haven't lived in 6 years. She gestured to the chaotic pile of currency. That isn't money on my desk. That's your blood. That's your sweat. If you give that to the hospital, what happens when Lily comes home? How do you pay for her medication? Her rehab? How do you buy her fresh food? How do you buy yourself a pair of shoes so you can walk to work without pain? Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his hands, those scarred, calloused hands that had scrubbed her floors and fixed her sinks. The healthcare system in this country is a business, Amy said, her voice turning bitter. And business is cruel to people who don't have leverage. Tonight, Marcus, I am your leverage. Why? Marcus whispered. The word came out strangled, a raw sound of disbelief. You don't even know me. I'm just the maintenance guy. I'm nobody. Amy looked away, focusing on the dark expanse of Central Park outside. Why was she doing it? Was it guilt? Was it the scotch she hadn't drunk? Because I know what it's like to look at a number on a piece of paper and realize it's the price of a life, she said softly. I know what it's like to have all the ambition in the world and to still be powerless. She turned back to him. Her mask of the Ice Queen slipped, just for a fraction of a second, revealing the tired, lonely woman beneath. Consider it a bonus, she said, retreating back into her corporate armor, because it was safer there. For 6 years of excellent service. And, let's call it a severance package. Marcus's face went pale. You're firing me. No. Amy stood up and walked over to him. She reached out and for the first time touched him. She placed a hand on his shoulder. His muscle was rock hard, tense with years of carrying the weight of the world. I'm saying that Marcus Donovan, the janitor who works 3 jobs and sleeps 4 hours, doesn't exist anymore. From today, your only job is to be Lily's father. The dam finally broke. Marcus didn't just cry. He crumbled. His knees hit the floor with a thud that shook the room. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders heaving with deep, guttural sobs that sounded like they were being torn from his soul. It was the sound of a man who had been holding up the sky for 6 years and was finally allowed to put it down. Amy stood there, awkward and stiff. She wasn't a hugger. She wasn't a comforter. But she didn't pull her hand away. She let him weep. She stood sentinel over his grief and his relief, guarding him while he let go of the terror that had defined his existence. Thank you, he choked out into the carpet over and over again. Thank you, oh God, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Amy said, her voice thick with an emotion she refused to name. She checked her phone. A text message from Robert appeared. Transfer initiated, confirmed. Receipt attached. She turned the screen toward Marcus. It's done, the hospital has the money. Marcus looked at the screen through his tears, reading the confirmation code like it was holy scripture. He took a deep, shuddering breath, wiping his face with his sleeve, smearing grease and tears across his cheek. I have to go, he said, struggling to his feet. He looked disoriented, drunk on relief. I have to get to the hospital. I have to tell the intake nurse. I have to be there when she wakes up. He grabbed the canvas bag, stuffing the rest of his crumpled bills inside with clumsy haste. I'll take the subway, he stammered, backing toward the door. I don't know how I'll ever repay you, Miss Fletcher. I'll work for free. I'll paint the whole building. Marcus, Amy interrupted. She grabbed her car keys from the console table. Not the keys to the town car service she used for work, but the keys to the sleek, black Mercedes convertible she hadn't driven in months. You're not taking the subway, she said, walking past him and opening the front door of the penthouse. It's 3 a.m. in New York City. The trains are slow and you're in no condition to be alone. She looked back at him, a challenge in her eyes. I'm driving you. The engine of the Mercedes SL roared to life, a low, guttural growl that echoed off the concrete walls of the underground parking garage. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated power, precision German engineering designed to eat up miles of asphalt without breaking a sweat. Amy Fletcher maneuvered the sleek black convertible out of her reserved spot, the tires squealing softly on the polished epoxy floor. Beside her, Marcus Donovan sat stiffly in the passenger seat. He looked absurdly out of place, his grease-stained work boots resting tentatively on the custom floor mats, his massive shoulders hunched as if trying to occupy as little space as possible in the luxury vehicle. They shot out of the garage and onto the empty streets of Manhattan. It was the witching hour, that strange, suspended time between the late-night revelers going home and the early morning delivery trucks starting their routes. Amy turned onto the FDR Drive, heading uptown toward the medical center. She drove with an aggressive confidence, weaving through the sparse traffic. For a long time, the only sound was the rhythmic thrum-thrum of the tires over the expansion joints of the highway and the wind rushing past the windows. "My wife, Sarah, she died in a city hospital," Marcus said suddenly. Amy didn't take her eyes off the road, but her grip on the leather steering wheel tightened. "I didn't know you were a widower, Marcus." 3 years ago, he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. He was staring out the window at the East River, dark and churning below them. Ovarian cancer. By the time we found it, it was stage 4. We didn't have the money for the specialists at Sloan Kettering. We had Medicaid. We waited in ERs for 12 hours just to get pain meds. I held her hand while she screamed because the nurse was too busy with a gunshot victim to check her chart. He turned to look at Amy, his eyes dry but haunted by a ghost that refused to leave. "She made me promise," he whispered. "Before the morphine took her under for the last time, she grabbed my shirt and pulled me close. She said, 'Don't let this happen to Lily. Don't let her be just a number. Promise me you'll fight for her.' That's why I saved every penny, Miss Fletcher. I wasn't just saving money. I was trying to buy my way out of a broken promise." Amy felt a lump form in her throat, hard and jagged. She swallowed it down. She thought of her own losses buried deep under layers of work and ambition. She realized with a sudden, piercing clarity that while she had been building skyscrapers and acquiring companies, Marcus had been fighting a war in the trenches of the American healthcare system. "You kept your promise," Amy said firmly, downshifting as they exited the highway. "Today, Lily is not a number. She is a VIP." They pulled up to the emergency entrance of New York Presbyterian. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital bay washed out the vibrant colors of the city, leaving everything stark and clinical. Amy parked the car in the no-standing zone. A security guard started to walk over, ready to wave them off. But Amy stepped out of the car. She wasn't wearing her blazer anymore, just a silk blouse and trousers, but she projected an aura of authority that made the guard hesitate. "Valet it," she said, tossing him the keys without looking back. "And if there's a scratch on it, Fletcher Industries will own this parking lot by noon." She didn't wait for a response. She marched through the sliding glass doors, Marcus trailing in her wake like a man walking into a dream. The hospital smell hit them instantly, a cocktail of antiseptic, floor wax, and stale coffee. It was the smell of anxiety. They navigated the labyrinth of hallways, taking the elevator to the pediatric cardiac unit on the 10th floor. When the elevator doors opened, the atmosphere changed. It was quieter here. The lighting was softer, but the tension was thicker. This was the place where parents prayed and bargains were made with God. "Room 1014, Marcus murmured, his pace quickening. He wasn't the maintenance man anymore. He was a father rushing toward his heart. They reached the room. Marcus stopped at the threshold, taking a deep breath to compose himself, wiping the last traces of his breakdown from his face. He pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit by the glow of monitors. In the center of the bed, dwarfed by the machinery surrounding her, lay Lily. She was awake. She was tinier than Amy had expected. At 7 years old, she looked 5. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with the bluish tint around the lips that signaled low oxygen. She was wearing a faded pink hospital gown with cartoon bunnies on it. Her dark hair was matted from days in bed, and she was clutching a stuffed bear that had lost one eye and most of its fur. "Daddy," she rasped. Her voice was weak, a thin reed of sound. "I'm here, baby girl." Marcus rushed to the bedside, dropping his bag and enveloping her hand in his. "I'm here. I told you I'd be back before the sun came up." "Did you get the magic paper?" she asked, her eyes fluttering. "The doctors said we need magic paper to fix my heart." Marcus choked back a sob. "Yeah, baby, we got it. We got the magic paper. Dr. Sterling is going to fix you up brand new." Amy stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. She watched the raw, unfiltered love between them, a connection so fierce it made the air in the room vibrate. She felt cold, acutely aware of the emptiness of her own life. She had assets. She had liquidity, but she didn't have this. Then Lily's eyes shifted. She looked past her father, focusing on the woman standing in the shadows of the doorway. Lily squinted, her brow furrowing. "Daddy, who is that?" Marcus turned, looking at Amy. He stood up, wiping his eyes, and beckoned her in. That's my boss, Lily, Miss Fletcher." Amy hesitated, then stepped into the room. She felt awkward, her hands unsure of what to do without a briefcase to hold. She walked to the other side of the bed. Lily looked up at her with wide, intelligent eyes. "You're really pretty," the girl whispered. "You look like the lady in the magazine Daddy found in the trash." Amy let out a startled, breathless laugh. "Thank you, Lily." "Are you the one who gave Daddy the magic paper?" Lily asked. Amy looked at Marcus. He nodded imperceptibly, giving her permission. "Yes," Amy said softly. "I helped him find it." Lily studied her for a long moment, the machines beeping rhythmically in the background. Beep, 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 counting out the seconds of a life that had almost run out of time. "Daddy says angels don't look like people," Lily said, her voice slurring slightly as fatigue pulled at her. "He says they're invisible, but I think he's wrong." She reached out a small, thin hand toward Amy. It was trembling. Amy froze. She wasn't maternal. She wasn't soft. She was the woman who fired people before Christmas to balance the Q4 budget. But looking at this little girl, who was fighting for every single breath, Amy felt the ice around her heart crack wide open. Slowly, tentatively, Amy reached out and took Lily's hand. It was warm. It was fragile. It was alive. "I think," Lily whispered, her eyes drifting closed as the sedative began to kick in, "that you're a visible angel. You have nice shoes." A single tear escaped Amy's eye, hot and fast, tracking through her perfect makeup. She squeezed the little girl's hand. "Get some sleep, Lily," Amy whispered, her voice fierce with a promise she hadn't known she was capable of making. "When you wake up, everything is going to be different." The double doors of the surgical wing swung shut with a heavy, pneumatic hiss, sealing Lily away from the world of the living and transferring her into the sterile purgatory of the operating room. For a moment, Marcus Donovan stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the brushed steel of the doors. His hands were empty. He had handed over his daughter, and in doing so, he had handed over his reason for breathing. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out, his massive frame suddenly looking fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights. Amy stood a few feet behind him. She didn't reach out this time. There are moments of grief so private, so visceral, that touching the person feels like a violation. "She's a fighter, Marcus," Amy said, her voice cutting through the hum of the ventilation system. "She's your daughter. She doesn't know how to quit." Marcus turned slowly. His eyes were glazed, distant. "They're stopping her heart," he whispered. "In about 20 minutes, they're going to stop her heart and hook her up to a machine. What if it doesn't start again?" "It will," Amy said, with the same absolute conviction she used to close billion-dollar mergers. "Dr. Sterling is the best, and I paid for the best." She gestured toward the waiting area down the hall. "Come on, you can't stand here for 8 hours." The surgical waiting room at New York Presbyterian was a study in suspended animation. It was a space designed for anxiety, rows of uncomfortable vinyl chairs, a television mutely playing a daytime talk show, and a vending machine humming in the corner. It was populated by people in various states of distress, a woman pacing while clutching a rosary, a young couple sleeping on each other's shoulders, and now the CEO of Fletcher Industries and her maintenance man. Amy sat down, smoothing the wrinkles in her silk trousers. She looked wildly out of place. Her presence commanded the room, yet she felt utterly powerless. In her world, if a problem arose, she fixed it. She threw money, lawyers, or strategy at it until it submitted. But here she was at the mercy of biology and time. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It had been buzzing incessantly for the last hour. She pulled it out. The screen lit up. "Jessica, executive assistant. 12 missed calls." "Where are you?" "The Tokyo partners are logging on in 10 minutes. The acquisition papers need your signature." "Amy, this is a code red." Amy stared at the text. Yesterday, this meeting was the most important thing in her life. It was the culmination of 6 months of ruthless negotiating. It was worth $40 million in stock options alone. She looked up at Marcus. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands, staring at a scuff mark on the linoleum floor. He wasn't thinking about stock options. He was thinking about the size of a scalpel. He was thinking about the silence of a stopped heart. Amy looked back at her phone. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she pressed the power button on the side of the device. She held it down. The screen went black. She slid the dead phone into her purse and zipped it shut. "You didn't have to stay," Marcus said. He hadn't looked up, but he had sensed the shift in her attention. "I know," Amy replied. "You're missing work. You're you're probably losing money just sitting in this chair." "I am," Amy admitted calmly. "A lot of it." Marcus lifted his head, turning to look at her with bloodshot eyes. "Why? I get paying for the surgery. You you did a good thing. You saved us. But why sit here? Why drink terrible coffee and stare at a wall with the janitor?" Amy stood up. She walked over to the vending machine, fed it $2 bills, and watched a bottle of water thud into the retrieval bin. She didn't retrieve it immediately. She stared at her reflection in the glass. The ice queen, the woman who fired people without blinking. "I was married once," she said. The confession was so quiet, Marcus almost missed it. "You were?" "10 years ago." Amy turned around, leaning against the machine. "His name was David. We were college sweethearts. We were young, ambitious, and broke. We lived in a shoebox apartment in Queens, eating ramen and dreaming of owning the city." She crossed her arms, hugging herself as a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning swept through her. "He got sick. Acute myeloid leukemia. It moved fast. We had the basic student insurance. It covered the basics, chemo, hospital stays. But there was a new immunotherapy trial at Mount Sinai. It was showing incredible results, but it was out of pocket." Marcus watched her, his own pain momentarily forgotten in the face of hers. "How much was it?" he asked. $200,000, Amy said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which made it all the more heartbreaking. "I tried to get loans. I tried to borrow from family. I tried everything. But I was a 24-year-old nobody with a credit score of 600. I couldn't raise the money." She looked at the ceiling, blinking back the sting of memory. "He died in a semi-private room with 3 other patients groaning behind curtains. He died in pain because we couldn't afford the better palliative care. And as I held his hand, I made a vow. I swore to God or the devil or whoever was listening that I would never ever be powerless again. I swore I would build a fortress of money so high that death couldn't get in." She looked at Marcus, her eyes fierce and wet. "I built the fortress, Marcus. I have the penthouse. I have the millions. But David is still dead. And I am very alone inside that fortress." The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared ghosts. "When I saw you counting that money," Amy continued, walking back to sit beside him, leaving one seat open between them as a buffer. "I didn't see a thief. I saw me. I saw the person I was 10 years ago, desperate and drowning. And I realized, if I couldn't save David, maybe I could save Lily. And if I could save Lily, maybe all this money isn't just paper. Maybe it actually means something." Marcus looked at her with a profound, shifting realization. He saw the cracks in the armor. He saw the wound that had driven her to become the Ice Queen. "He would be proud of you," Marcus said softly. "David, he'd be proud of what you did today." Amy let out a shaky breath, a single laugh escaping her lips. "I don't know about that. I think he'd be mad I turned off my phone during the Tokyo deal." "Screw Tokyo," Marcus said, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. "Yeah," Amy agreed, leaning her head back against the wall. "Screw Tokyo." They sat in silence as the hours dragged on. 1 hour, 2, 4, 6. The waiting room emptied and filled again. The sun moved across the sky outside, shifting the shadows on the floor. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. They were 2 soldiers in the same trench, waiting for the signal flare. At the 7-hour mark, the double doors swung open. Marcus shot up from his chair like he had been electrocuted. Amy stood up with him, her heart hammering in her chest as if it were her own child on the table. Dr. Sterling walked toward them. He was still in his surgical scrubs, a mask hanging around his neck. He looked exhausted. There was blood, tiny specks of it, on his surgical booties. Marcus couldn't breathe. He gripped the back of the vinyl chair so hard his knuckles turned white. "Mr. Donovan?" the doctor asked. "Is she—" Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. Amy stepped forward, her hand instinctively finding Marcus's elbow, anchoring him. "Doctor," she said, her voice steady, "tell us." Dr. Sterling pulled down his surgical mask. The skin beneath was pale, marked with deep creases from hours of intense concentration. He looked from Marcus to Amy, his expression unreadable for an agonizing second that felt longer than the previous 7 hours combined. It was successful, he said. The words hung in the sterile hallway air, simple and absolute. She's stable, Dr. Sterling continued, a tired smile finally breaking through his professional stoicism. The valve reconstruction was complex, more than we anticipated from the scans, but we managed to repair the defect completely. Her heart is beating on its own. It's strong, Mr. Donovan, stronger than it's ever been. Marcus didn't speak. He couldn't. The air left his lungs in a rush, a sound that was half gasp, half sob. His legs, which had carried him through 3 jobs and 6 years of hell, finally gave out. He didn't fall, though. He lunged forward, not toward the doctor, but toward the only other person who had stood in the fire with him. He grabbed Amy. It wasn't a polite social embrace. It was a collision. Marcus wrapped his massive arms around her, burying his face in the crook of her neck, and squeezed with the desperate, terrifying strength of a man who had just been pulled back from the edge of an abyss. "Thank you," he choked out, his voice muffled against her silk blouse, wet tears soaking the expensive fabric immediately. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Amy Fletcher stood frozen for a heartbeat. She was not a woman who touched. She was a woman who shook hands across mahogany tables. But as Marcus shook against her, sobbing with a raw, guttural relief that echoed off the hospital walls, the Ice Queen melted. She raised her arms and hugged him back. She held him tight, feeling the tremors in his broad back, smelling the faint scent of motor oil and old sweat that clung to his uniform. A scent that now smelled like victory. "She made it, Marcus," Amy whispered, her own eyes stinging. "She made it." They stood there for a long moment, the CEO and the janitor, clinging to each other in the middle of the hallway, while nurses pushed carts past them and the intercom paged doctors to other emergencies. The barriers of class, of money, of the 50 floors that usually separated them in the Fletcher building were incinerated. Dr. Sterling cleared his throat politely. "We're moving her to the PICU, the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. You can see her in about 20 minutes. But only for a moment. She needs rest." Marcus pulled away, wiping his face with his sleeve, looking embarrassed but unashamed. Yes, of course, I'll wait." 20 minutes later, they walked into the PICU. The room was dimly lit, bathed in the blue glow of a dozen monitors. It was a symphony of technology, hisses, beeps, hums, all working in concert to sustain life. And there she was. Lily looked small in the center of the bed, almost lost amidst the tangle of wires, IV lines, and the ventilator tube that was still helping her breathe. Her chest was covered in white gauze. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll held together by modern medicine. But then there was the sound. Beep, 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 beep. It wasn't the erratic, struggling rhythm Marcus was used to. It was steady. It was robust. It was the sound of a drum beating a march of triumph. Marcus walked to the bedside as if approaching an altar. He reached out a trembling hand and lightly touched Lily's cheek, careful not to disturb the tube taped to her face. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered. "Daddy's here. You did it. You fought so hard." Amy stood by the door, keeping her distance. She watched the monitor. She watched the green lines spike and fall, 80 beats per minute. Perfect. She remembered David. She remembered the sound of his monitor slowing down, the silence that followed, the flat line that screamed that she was too poor, too late, too powerless. But today the monitor didn't stop. Amy felt a shift in her soul, tectonic and irreversible. For 10 years, she had hoarded wealth like a dragon, believing that money was a shield. Today she realized money wasn't a shield. It was a key. It was a tool. And for the first time since David died, the money didn't feel cold. It felt warm. It felt like life. She looked at Marcus, who was now leaning his forehead against the mattress, his eyes closed, listening to the beep of the monitor like it was his favorite song. "Ms. Fletcher?" Amy startled. Marcus had turned to look at her. "Come here," he said softly. "Please." Amy walked over. "Listen," Marcus said. The room was quiet except for the machine. "Beep, beep, beep." "That's a whole heart," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face again, illuminated by the monitor's glow. "That's a whole heart beating. You bought that. You bought that sound." "No," Amy said, her voice thick. She looked at Lily, then at Marcus. I just paid the bill. You bought it, Marcus. You bought it with every skipped meal, every walked mile, every dollar you saved in that notebook. I just, I just helped you carry it across the finish line. Marcus reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and calloused. We did it, he said. We did it, Amy agreed. She looked down at their joined hands. The Rolex on her wrist ticked in time with the monitor. The silence of her penthouse, the coldness of her bank accounts, the emptiness of her victory in Chicago. It all seemed a million miles away. Here in this room, amidst the smell of antiseptic and the hum of machinery, Amy Fletcher felt something she hadn't felt in a decade. She felt rich, truly, vaguely, wildly rich. 5 days later, the rhythm of the hospital had become Marcus Donovan's new normal. He knew which nurse brought the extra Jell-O cups, Nurse Brenda, which coffee machine in the lobby actually used fresh beans, the one near the gift shop, and exactly how many steps it took to walk from the visitor's chair to the window overlooking the East River. 4 steps. Lily was sitting up. That was the miracle. She was propped against a mountain of pillows watching cartoons on a tablet Amy had accidentally left behind. Her color was returning, a soft pink flushing out the terrifying gray that had haunted her skin for years. The tube was gone. She was eating applesauce. She was complaining about the scratchy blankets. It was the most beautiful complaining Marcus had ever heard. But as Lily grew stronger, the crushing weight of reality began to settle back onto Marcus's shoulders. He stood by the window, staring at his reflection in the glass. He was wearing jeans and a fresh t-shirt Amy had sent over, but in his mind, he was already back in his gray jumpsuit. He did the math in his head. If he picked up 2 extra shifts at the gym and started driving Uber immediately after his maintenance shift ended at 3 p.m., he could maybe start paying Amy back in installments of $500 a month. It would take him roughly 66 years to pay off the $400,000. A knock on the doorframe interrupted his spiral of anxiety. Amy Fletcher stood there. She was back in her armor, a sharp navy blazer, tailored slacks, hair pulled back in a severe perfect bun. But the air around her was different. The frost was gone. Knock, knock, she said, stepping inside. Miss Fletcher. Marcus straightened up instinctively, a reflex from years of service. I was just thinking about when I can get back to the building. I know I've missed a week. I can work weekends to make up the hours. Amy didn't answer immediately. She walked over to the bed. Hey, Bug, she said to Lily. Lily grinned, revealing a gap-toothed smile. Hi, Amy. Look, the coyote fell off the cliff again. He never learns, does he? Amy smiled, then turned her attention to Marcus. Can we take a walk, Marcus? Lily, are you okay for 5 minutes? I'm good, Lily chirped, eyes glued to the screen. Marcus followed Amy out into the hallway. They walked past the nurse's station and found a quiet alcove near the elevators. I have the schedule worked out, Marcus started, speaking fast. I'll clean the HVAC filters on Saturday. I can repaint the lobby on Sunday night so it doesn't smell for the tenants. And about the money, I know I can't pay it all at once, but I'm going to sign a promissory note. I'll pay you every cent, Miss Fletcher, even if it takes me the rest of my life. Amy watched him, her expression unreadable. She waited for him to finish his desperate pitch. You're not painting the lobby, Marcus, she said calmly. Marcus's stomach dropped. I understand. I missed too much time. You hired someone else. He nodded, trying to maintain his dignity. I get it. It's business. I'll clear out my locker tomorrow. You're not fired, Amy said, pulling a thick manila envelope from her leather tote bag. But you are finished with maintenance. She handed him the envelope. What is this? Marcus asked, his hands trembling slightly as he took it. A contract, Amy said. Open it. Marcus undid the clasp and pulled out a stack of papers. The header didn't say Fletcher Industries Employee Agreement. It read, The Second Chances Foundation. He scanned the first page. His eyes widened. He skipped to the second page. His mouth fell open. Director of Operations, he read aloud, his voice squeaking. Salary? $120,000 a year? Plus benefits? Plus equity? He looked up at her, terrified. Ms. Fletcher, I think you gave me the wrong papers. This looks like a job for an executive. I fix toilets. I change light bulbs. And you save lives, Amy countered, her voice sharp and passionate. You saved $300,000 on a janitor's salary, Marcus. Do you know what kind of discipline that takes? I know Ivy League MBA graduates who can't manage a budget that tight. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I've spent the last week thinking about David, about Lily, about the money I have sitting in accounts, gathering dust and interest. It's useless, Marcus. It's just points on a scoreboard unless it does something. She gestured to the hospital around them. I'm starting a foundation, the Second Chances Foundation. Our mission is to bridge the gap for families like yours, people who work hard, who do everything right, but who get crushed by a system that demands cash for survival. We're going to pay for surgeries. We're going to cover the gaps insurance won't touch. That's that's amazing, Marcus said, awestruck. You'll help so many people. But why me? You need a suit for this. You need someone who knows how to talk to donors. I have plenty of suits, Amy said dismissively. I have lawyers. I have accountants. I have PR people. They know how to talk about money, but they don't know what it feels like to be $47,000 short of a heartbeat. She poked a manicured finger against his chest, right over his heart. I don't need a suit, Marcus. I need a heart. I need someone who can look a terrified father in the eye and tell him, I know, I've been there, and we've got you. I need someone who knows the value of a dollar because he bled for it. Marcus looked down at the contract. The salary was more money than he had ever seen. It was security. It was a college fund for Lily. It was a house with a backyard. I'm just a maintenance guy, he whispered, the imposter syndrome gripping his throat. Not anymore, Amy said softly. You're the man who moved mountains for his daughter. That's the qualification. That's the only resume I care about. She crossed her arms, her CEO mask slipping back into place, but the eyes remained warm. Besides, she added dryly, I need someone to make sure I don't turn into an unfeeling corporate robot again. You're my anchor, Marcus. You keep me human. I give you the resources to change the world. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. Marcus looked at the woman who had saved his daughter's life. He saw the vulnerability she was trying to hide, the lonely widow reaching out for a connection, for a purpose that went beyond the boardroom. He looked back at the door to Lily's room. He thought about the gray jumpsuit in his locker. He thought about the notebook full of skipped meals. Then he looked at Amy. I don't know the first thing about running a foundation, Marcus admitted. I'll teach you, Amy promised. I'll teach you the business. You teach the foundation how to care. Marcus took a deep breath. He felt the weight of the last 6 years, the fear, the hunger, the exhaustion, finally truly dissolve. Where do I sign? He asked. Amy pulled a Mont Blanc pen from her purse and clicked it. A genuine smile, one that reached her eyes and transformed her face, broke through. Right on the dotted line, partner. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was buzzing with the specific frequency of high society charity. It was a symphony of clinking crystal champagne flutes, polite laughter, and the rustle of designer silk. The air smelled of expensive perfume and success. In the center of the room, standing under a chandelier the size of a small car, was a man who used to be invisible. Marcus Donovan tugged at the collar of his tuxedo. It was a Tom Ford custom fit, tailored to accommodate his broad shoulders, a gift from Amy. He looked at his reflection in a passing waiter's silver tray. He barely recognized himself. The grease stains were gone. The exhaustion that used to carve deep valleys under his eyes had been filled in by decent sleep and the absence of crushing fear. Stop fidgeting, a voice whispered beside him. You look like $1,000,000, which coincidentally is the goal for tonight's fundraising. Marcus turned to see Amy Fletcher. She was wearing a floor-length silver gown that shimmered like liquid mercury. She looked formidable, beautiful, and for the first time in forever, relaxed. I feel like an imposter, Amy, Marcus confessed, keeping his voice low as a senator walked by. 6 months ago, I was unclogging the drains in this city. Now I'm asking these people for checks with 5 zeros on them. Amy reached out and adjusted his bow tie, her touch familiar and grounding. You're not an imposter, Marcus. You're the only honest thing in this room, she said. These people write checks to feel good. You write checks to save lives. There's a difference. Now go up there and tell them the truth. The lights dimmed. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the stage. The chatter died down. Marcus walked up the steps. His legs felt heavy, but his heart, the heart that had broken 1,000 times over Lily's hospital bed, was steady. He gripped the podium. He looked out at the sea of faces, tech moguls, Wall Street sharks, old money socialites. He didn't pull out a prepared speech. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a small, battered object. A spiral notebook. The cover was peeling, the wire binding bent. He placed it on the podium. The silence in the room deepened. "Good evening," Marcus said, his deep voice echoing through the hall. "My name is Marcus Donovan. I am the director of the Second Chances Foundation." He paused, resting his hand on the notebook. "But before that, I was a janitor. I was an Uber driver. I was the guy you passed in the lobby without looking up from your phone." He opened the notebook to a random page. October 14th, 2019, skipped dinner, saved $12. Destination, Lily's heart. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. "This notebook," Marcus continued, lifting it up, "is the ledger of a father's desperation. For 6 years, I measured my life in quarters and single-dollar bills. I measured my love for my daughter and how much hunger I could endure. And despite all that, despite starving myself, selling my car, and working 3 jobs, I came up short." He looked at Amy, standing in the wings of the stage. She nodded at him. "I was $47,000 short. In the economy of American healthcare, that gap is the difference between a casket and a college fund. I was ready to give up. I was drowning." Marcus took a breath, and his voice thickened with emotion. "But then, someone threw me a lifeline. Not just money. She gave me dignity. She reminded me that the value of a human life cannot be found on a spreadsheet. Because of her, and because of the mission we started, 24 families have stood where I stood. And 24 times we stepped in and said, 'Not today. Today your child lives.'" He gestured to the curtain behind him. "But I'm not the proof. The proof is backstage eating all the shrimp." The crowd laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the toughest fighter I know, my daughter, Lily." The curtain swept back. Lily walked out. She wasn't frail anymore. She was wearing a puffy blue dress that she had picked out herself, her hair shiny and curled. She bounced to the center of the stage, grabbed her father's hand, and waved to the crowd with the confidence of a Broadway star. Her cheeks were pink. Her eyes were bright. And if you listened closely in the silence between the thunderous applause that erupted, you could almost hear the steady, powerful rhythm of a heart that had been given a second chance. Amy watched from the side, tears streaming freely down her face, ruining her makeup for the second time in 6 months. She didn't care. As the applause washed over them, Marcus looked over at Amy and extended his hand toward her. It was an invitation. Amy hesitated. This was their moment. But Lily was already beckoning her, hopping up and down. Amy walked onto the stage. She took Marcus's other hand. There they stood. The former janitor, the healed child, and the redeemed CEO. 3 broken pieces that had fit together to make something whole. They weren't just business partners. They weren't just friends. As Marcus squeezed her hand and Lily leaned her head against Amy's hip, the truth was undeniable. They were a family, not by blood, but by choice, by survival. A family forged in the fire of a crisis and cooled in the shadow of a miracle. Later that night, after the checks had been signed and the guests had left, the 3 of them sat on the balcony of the penthouse. Amy's penthouse. The city lights twinkled below them, the same view Amy had looked at with hollow eyes in part 1. But tonight, the silence wasn't expensive. It was peaceful. Lily was asleep on the outdoor sofa, covered in Marcus's tuxedo jacket. "We raised $2 million tonight," Amy said, holding a glass of champagne but not drinking it. That's a lot of surgeries, Marcus." "It's a lot of second chances," Marcus corrected softly. He was leaning against the railing, looking at the skyline. "You know, I kept the gray jumpsuit." "You did?" Amy raised an eyebrow. "Why? It smells like floor wax." "To remember," as Marcus said. He turned to look at her. "To remember that the distance between the penthouse and the basement isn't as far as people think. We're all just one bad diagnosis, one bad day away from needing a hand." He walked over to her. The tension that had defined their early relationship, the employer and employee dynamic, was long dead. In its place was a profound, quiet intimacy. "You saved her, Amy," Marcus whispered. "No," Amy shook her head, looking at the sleeping girl. "She saved me. I was rich, Marcus, but I was bankrupt. You filled the account." Marcus smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "Well then, I guess we're even." Amy looked out at the city, her city. It didn't look like a battlefield anymore. It looked like a place where miracles could happen, if you were brave enough to pay the price. "Yeah," she whispered, "we're even. Conclusion. They say money can't buy happiness, and maybe that's true. But money in the right hands can buy time. It can buy a heartbeat. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it can buy you a family you didn't know you needed. Amy Fletcher and Marcus Donovan started with a transaction, but they ended with a transformation. They proved that while the cost of living is high, the value of loving is infinite. So I have to ask you, have you ever felt like you were hitting a wall? Like the system was rigged against you? And suddenly, help came from the most unexpected place? Or maybe you've been the one to offer that hand. Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, if you believe in second chances and the power of kindness, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Join our community. Let's tell more stories that matter. See you in the next video.